now he's dying, we don't necessarily see that he's experiencing that. We have the archaic smile, so now we're gonna go look at warrior B. We still have the archaic smile, but he's falling on the ground, he's rolling over the edge, he looks down at the earth as he falls. We have more of a sense of his understanding that he's dying. But that's becoming something that the artist who worked on this wanted to convey. Okay, so when we look at both A and B, we can see that they look fairly muscular, they look proportional, they look naturalistic, except for the hair up there, and the face, which is simplified a bit, and of course that smile. And we still have those factors here on warrior B. So what warrior B is really showing is his pose, and the direction of his head is showing us the narrative and the story more than warrior A. Okay, so you can see that right there with these two. And now we are going off to the classical world. All right, I already did that part. Okay. So did I tell you guys the story of the Trojan War and Achilles? No. Okay, so here we go. So a lot of Greek art is actually going to be taken from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. So Homer was this blind poet, probably working somewhere around the 8th or 9th century BCE in ancient Greece. His tales were known orally. They weren't being written down until later. And his tales kind of summarize kind of history and emotion and ideals together about what it meant to be part of the culture of ancient Greece from the perspective largely of male culture and male voices. And so he was lionized. He was adored by the ancient Greeks. And they used his accounts in his stories. Has anybody here read part of the Iliad or the Odyssey? And they're big, right? They're big. So there are these grand epic stories. And people are going to use them in their art. They're going to use them to decorate vases. They're going to use these stories from Homer on their temples for their sculptures. It's really fundamental to how the Greeks understand themselves. Now, the other thing that's really important, I think I've talked to you about it a little bit, is for the Greeks, the male body was meant to be seen publicly. And men, especially of the warrior classes, of the aristocratic classes, not the soldier classes, if that makes any difference. Like foot soldiers, but anybody on a horse, anybody driving a chariot, anybody with lots and lots of gear, those are people with higher social status. And those are people who are seen as exemplars. That the gods created humans in the image of the gods. And so men, like the gods, can be naked. Now the gods aren't always naked, but they can be. So that's an interesting phenomenon. But here's the deal. Women in ancient Greece, they needed to stay covered up. In fact, one of their most important jobs was weaving cloth inside their houses. So they're making the cloth that everybody in the family wears. They need to be covered with the cloth. And in general, women didn't go out of their household very often if they were of very high social status, like medium social status. Enslaved women, poor women went out and about. But these high status or medium status women, they're isolated. And they're covering their bodies. And we don't see representations of the Greek goddesses naked. And we don't see the women naked. So one of the things that's going to happen, of course, is at some point, some artist is going to get the idea, well, you know who he is, to make a naked goddess. This doesn't mean it's ever okay for women in Greek culture to be naked.
Were all women naked make it do it at top? Is that why they do the sculptures like that?
They work out a lot in the gymnasium and they do it without clothes on. And they do boxing, so, you know. But yes, they consider themselves to be made in the image of the gods so that they would present themselves in the way that the gods would present themselves, so nude, often. And that's where we get this concept that comes from this ancient Greek saying that man is the measure of all things, because man is made in the image of God. Okay, so let's take a look at this black figure vase. So black figure means that you have a nice red vase that you've made out of red terracotta clay. It has a lot of iron in it. When you put it in an open fire kiln, oxygen is going to mix in there and it's going to keep the whole vase red. But they're going to paint on the vase with a slip. Like we already talked about slip before, this liquidy clay. And it's going to have a certain kind of iron in it that when you put it in the kiln and you run the temperature up really high, and then you close off the kiln so air and oxygen can't get into it, just the slip will turn black. And you take it up to this temperature where even if you open the kiln now and let the sides of the kiln get oxygen, it can't turn back to red. So this doesn't have that effect. This is going to always be red, and this one is going to go red to black and stay black. And so they're going to do these paintings. Now, one of the things to think about with this particular one is it's kind of cool. Whoops. Yeah, all right, we'll stick with this scene. Is that most of the pot is actually black. They only have this one register in it that has decoration on it. And this is by the artist Exekias, and Exekias, I'm not seeing it. Where is it? Exekias. It basically says, I think it's up here. Exekias says that I made this. So we have like a signature on it. That means that his name on the vase added value to it. Okay, and so he also labels the figures so we know what story from the Iliad that we're looking at. And so look at how tiny their feet are. Look at their narrow ankles. These are big, massive warriors. And they've got these cute little tiny feet that could not possibly hold their bodies and their armor as they go into battle. Notice that we've got the eyes in frontal view, even though we're looking at the profile view. So these are qualities that are archaic. And look at the curls in the hair, stylized again, creating a pattern. So it's another clue telling us that it's archaic. So black figure is archaic. And here's where they're playing the dice. But I want you to notice how elaborate the design is. So what they would do is after they would paint on the slip that's going to turn black, they would take a burin, and we've already talked about the burin, the pointed tool, which they used for the Corinthian pottery. And they're going to do the same thing here. But they're making what we call contour lines and edge lines in art to give a sense of depth and kind of surface pattern. So we get to see the arm, the muscles, etc. on these figures. All of these light colors right here are where they've scratched through the slip. Okay, so this is a black figure vase, but this is called the Death of Achilles Amphora. Now, you don't need to write this one down in terms of recognizing this one. It's not going to be on our list. It's just showing you the story. So Achilles' cousin is going to get killed in battle. And there's some debate over whether his cousin is just his cousin or also his lover. And so male-male sex was very, very common in ancient Greece. And it was considered almost a beneficial relationship in terms of you would find a youth who was 15 or 16 if you were an older male, and you would take them under your wing and show them how to be a proper Greek citizen and also introduce them to sexual behavior. Today, we would have a lot of problems with that, and we do. It was what was considered normal and expected in ancient Greece. Okay, so that his cousin, he might have been in an intimate relationship with his cousin. His cousin gets killed by the Trojans. And so in outrage, when Achilles goes back on the battlefield and they're fighting, he's fighting out of rage. He's gone mad with rage. So do you remember when I talked about Croesus and I said Croesus has written on his Koros figure, cut down in the front lines of battle by mad Ares, god of war. So it's the idea of like war madness. And so he goes out there and he kills the prince of Troy. And you're supposed to, once you've had major battle deaths, you're supposed to withdraw from the field in ancient Greece. And then each side would send people out to get the bodies and take them back for proper honoring and burial or cremation. He doesn't do it. He ties the body, Hector, to his chariot and he races around the citadel of Troy, defiling the body, and then refusing to give it back. The king of Troy pleads for his son's body and still he doesn't want to give it back. He has offended the fates. The Greek fates are these three old crones who decide your future and when to snip the thread of your life. They are not goddesses, they are fates. He has practiced hubris. He was given a supernatural, extra powerful body by the gods, and he has dishonored warfare between kingdoms. So he has to suffer his fate. So he's going to die. He dies in battle, and he is carried off the field by Ajax. And that's what we're seeing right there. So one of the things that's going to happen is as that black figure is coming in the late Archean period, which means it's close to the classical period. And in the classical period, around the time of the classical period, we're going to see that vase painting is going to change from black figure to red figure. I'm not going to show you a picture, I'm just going to tell you about it. The first artists to do that weren't sure they could actually sell their red figure vases. So they had to be extra careful. So they'd have a lovely vase with this scene from either Greek mythology or Homer on it, and it would be black figure on the front, and when you turn it around, it would be red figure. And these are called bilingual vases. So just kind of an interesting phenomenon. They're testing out the market to see what the market will bear. And that's an important thing to think about when we are considering art, is people make a living at it, or they're trying to make a living at it, and how are they going to do that? Fashions change, taste changes, and they've got to follow that. Innovation is going to be important because that's one of the ways they're going to make money. Okay, so we were talking about black figure and the transfer to red figure. I'm going to get there eventually. So we can see an example of red figure happening over here. You're going to paint that black slip, not to make the figures anymore, but to make the background. And that's going to make the red figures really pop. By using the red for the bodies, instead of having these same sized lines cut through to make the contours and give you an indication of the body, they're going to be able to make thicker and thinner dots and lines. So here we see the sword coming through. This is like this scene. These are both the same scene. So Ajax basically goes crazy because he is not awarded his dear friend Achilles' armor. He goes absolutely mad. He thinks he's talking to the gods. He's going out and slaughtering a herd of sheep because he thinks the gods had told him to. He loses it because he doesn't get Achilles' armor, so he goes mad. And when he realizes that he's gone mad, he's humiliated in front of his peers, and he decides to unalive him. And he basically throws himself on his sword, piles up the dirt around it so he can literally throw himself onto his sword. It's a really gruesome scene. And so here, it's hard to get all that detail in if we're using the black figure style. So we see him putting the dirt, the soil around his sword to hold it upright. But over here, they can bring in so much detail with the black that they can have it going through his body, puncturing out the other side, and we see the blood pouring down in these big spurts. We see these different kind of details here. And the next thing I want you to notice, it's hard to see on this figure, but look at the feet. They're more proportional. The ankles are more proportional. We're moving into the classical style. So red figures associated with the classical. Okay, so meanwhile, we're still in the world of Achilles with these vases. You might notice that I made it a theme. And so Achilles is in battle for Troy. This is before he dies. And he is facing the Amazon queen. So remember, the Amazons are these powerful female warriors. How many of you have watched the Wonder Woman movies? So this is Penthesilea, the queen. And she is coming out to fight Achilles, but she's not a demigod. She's not going to be able to kill him. And he thrusts his spear in some versions, his sword in other versions. He thrusts his weapon into her neck and chest and kills her. And just at this moment, they look each other in the eye. This is how the fates work. They're so tricky. They look each other in the eyes and they realize they are fated mates. They are true loves. And they have that for only a few seconds before she dies. He's had a hard time. All right. So here we have the black figure, but notice they're beginning to decorate more with red. So we're transitioning in. And she's shown with a really light skin. Remember the Minoans? Now, I gotta say, she's an amazing swordswoman. There's no way she's not working out outside. She's gonna be tan. But we don't see that. It's an ideal. But we don't get that sense of they both realize that they are mates. We just have to know the story. And we have all these labels telling us who the figures are, so we can tell who they are. Because a lot of Greeks, the ones who can afford these sculptures, these pots, they could read. So there she is. Now let's look at this later red figure one. So what this one is like a wine cup. And it's not very deep. And look, here is the queen. Here is Achilles. And look at their eyes. So their eyes are now, see that in profile view, where her eyes are, and they're looking at each other, and they realize their love. Even as she dies, she's falling to her knees, and look, they're making the figures fit into the curve of the cup. This Amazon warrior is already dead, and she is slithering down under them. And there's nothing Achilles can do. He's already put his sword into her. She's gone. Here is an example of one of those bilingual vases. Okay, so that's it for faces, and now let's go to the classical world. All right, so we are going to be looking at the classical. Actually, I want to do something. Look at my beautiful. So we're now entering into the realm of classical sculpture. It's between like 490 and 390, so it lasts a fairly long time. And what we're looking at here is a series of pediment sculptures, so from that triangular top under the roof on a temple. And this one is from the Temple of Zeus in Olympia, Greece. That temple is really almost completely gone, but the sculptures were saved. And so we're looking at these beautiful sculptures. And one of the things to notice about the classical style is they often show figures in action, but they might be fighting. But usually you don't see really dynamic action. Now that vase I just showed you, the Penthesilea vase with Achilles, that one that was in the classical style, that one is actually very dynamic and emotional, more so than you tend to get in sculpture. And in part, we don't know that much about painting because of what we talked about before. We've got the pot as our example of painting. Okay. So let's take a look at this guy. He is a charioteer. He's made out of bronze, and he was gifted to Apollo upon the successful chariot race at some games. Now, you've heard of the Olympic Games in ancient Greece, but almost every city-state had games. It wasn't just Olympia. So the Athenians had the Athenian games, the Thebans had the Theban games, and so they're games all the time. It was a way for men of social status and women of social status to get more social status by participating in these games. And so what we're seeing here is, remember, I think I told you guys that horses really matter to the Greeks. So here we can see this guy, the charioteer, was originally part of a whole sculptural set, life-size, with the 3 horses and the chariot. And he's all that's left. Everything was made out of bronze. He got broken, he got buried. The rest of them got melted down and they disappeared. So that's happened to a lot of Greek bronze statues. They're just gone forever. So anyway, he's looking forward. He's thinking. We have a relatively naturalistic face. We have naturalistic hair instead of those patterned curls that we saw in the archaic. We see naturalistic drapery folds. Nothing's exactly the same. Nothing's patterned the way we see it in the archaic. And here you can see he has the silver eyelashes. Isn't that pretty nice? Okay, he had inlay with glass to show his eyes and make his eyes look as naturalistic as possible. But we've been seeing that all the way back into Mesopotamia. But here they're using it because it gives an extra kick. When we look at it, he looks like this gray-green color, but originally he was the color of brass. So he was this yellowy orange color. And it would have looked more like a tan on the guy. So at first, in the early classical period, I'm not going to make you know the early classical, I'm just trying to give you tools to hang on to the information with. You tend to be very calm. They're so calm that the figures are often called severe. They tend not to smile. The archaic smile is gone. Now we look at this guy. He's an older man. He's a blind seer who knows that a crime is going to take place. And so no one's listening to him, and he's appalled. And we see that they're starting to show us emotion, but we don't see a lot of emotion. And we get that naturalism of, hey, he's got really curly hair, but he's bald. All right, so now the Krios boy is the last of our Koros figures. So Kroisos was a Koros figure. The Koros, which is actually called the New York Koros, but I don't think you know him. There are a lot of these figures that were found, and they're all these male nudes. And this is the last one, and what's interesting about him, so he's the latest one that was made that we have record of. He was found in Athens in the foundations of a wall that they put up after the sacred temple had been destroyed by the Persians. And so he's not life-size. He's 2 feet 10 inches tall. So all those other figures, remember the male figures were like 6 feet, 6'1", 6'3", and now he's little. But notice that he is active. He's naturalistic looking. He would have been wearing something on the top of his head that we don't get to see. He's sitting in what we call a contrapposto stance. So I'm going to have everybody take that contrapposto stance. You know, I'd love to make you stand up and take poses. So let's go ahead and I want you to notice he doesn't have a perfect circular belly button like the archaic figures often did. His head got knocked off. His eyes have lost their inlay. And we can see his hips twisting. All right, now we're looking at this sculpture. He's pretty interesting. He was found with another warrior with a strange head on him. That warrior had, like, the lower part of his head kind of looks kind of like this guy, and at the top, it's all smooth and flat. It looks like he actually was made to wear the helmet of the man he was dedicated to. But this one wasn't, so we get to see his hair. He actually looks a little bit more appealing to us, so I like to show him. He's in what's the pose? Contrapposto pose. So we see that knee bent, foot's a little bit forward, he's holding on to his spear, and he's looking off to the side. So I like to give you a little bit of a twist, whether it's the shoulders or the head. Naturalistic curls, he's made with the lost wax casting method. He was made in pieces, his legs were made separately, his arms and head were made separately, body was made separately, and then he gets soldered together. He was also that brassy bronze color. And check out his toes. I just love the naturalism of the knuckles of his toes over here. The next thing to do when you're looking at him is to notice that his eyes pop. You can see he's got the inlaid eyes. But check out his lips. What color are they?
They look bronze-ish.
Well, he's bronze. They're copper. Yes, copper lips. And not only does he have copper lips, this is the way you can help remember him, he has copper nips. Nips and lips. So that makes it that kind of pinkish color. He's an older guy. Remember how all the Koro statues were these young men? He's got a full beard. He's a big old guy. And he's a hero. You can tell he had a shield on his arm. Now, he and his buddy, they were found on the seafloor off Riace in Italy. Why were they found there? Because when the Romans took political control of Greece, they loved Greek sculpture and Greek art, and they imported tons of it into Italy. And so it was on its way to Italy. There was a storm. The ship went down, and all that was really left were some pots and these bronze figures. And a dentist in the early 1970s was out scuba diving on a Sunday, and he sees this arm, this part of the arm sticking up out of the water, and his first thought was, mafia victim. And then he swims up to it and touches it, and he realizes, wait, that's not a dead person, that's a sculpture. Look at his teeth. He has silver teeth. He's got this silver eyelashes. Pretty fabulous. All right, so now we're looking at this sculpture by the artist Polykleitos. So we've got another artist that we know. And Polykleitos was interested in this idea of creating a perfect form. This one is a copy of Polykleitos' work. This is a Roman copy. The Romans made their copies primarily in marble. Marble doesn't have the strength of bronze. So bronze, you can have the figures freestanding, just like we were with the Riace warrior we just looked at. But these marble ones, they need a support for their legs to hold them so that they don't break. Or their arms. If their arms are completely free, they might break. So the Roman artist put in this little piece just to stabilize that arm so it wouldn't break off. So Polykleitos, and his name is Polykleitos, Polykleitos, wanted to come up with what he called the canon. He was interested in that idea about proportional kind of representation that the Egyptians had used for the way that they portrayed pharaohs. Remember, a pharaoh would have 6 pharaoh fists across the chest. So he wants to do that for the Greeks, but he wants to go way beyond anything that the Egyptians did. He's like, no, we wouldn't want our figures to look pre-archaic style. That would be terrible. He wants to take it to the height of naturalism. And so he's going to come up with a system where he tries to figure out how you can get the perfect form. And it's more than just how many fists go across. It's like, what's the ideal way to represent a male form when he's a warrior? when he is at rest, when he's thinking. He's not lounging in a chair, he's just taking a temporary pause. He writes a whole book, a whole scroll book on his plan for how you do this. And we know he wrote it because we have other artists who also wrote things from ancient Greece writing down that they're trying to get the effect of his work with what's called the canon. Now this is canon with C-A-N-O-N, so that means like, this is the ideal thing. This is the ideal work, not a cannon that fires gunpowder and cannonballs. And so we've got his canon right here. The only problem is his particular scroll, it got destroyed. There's a good chance that it was in a library that was put together to have the great scrolls of the world around the Mediterranean
Mm-hmm.
in Egypt, rather later than this. And the library, in its attempts to make sure they had all the knowledge of the world at their fingertips, it might have burned down. And all the scrolls, pretty much carbonized or just gone completely. So, this is what we got. We don't know what he used, just for his proportions. But the best guess is he's using just this part of the finger, the first knuckle. Not a fist. A fist is too small, too big, it's not subtle. And he's got all these other features here. So notice we've got contrapposto, we can see it, and then we don't even have to see his knee, we can see the hip. At an angle, we've got contrapposto. He's rotating. And what he likes to do is he likes to get a little tension in there by having the same side of the body where you have the knee bending, he has the arm bending. He thought that just made it a little bit better. Today, in our culture, we tend to feel like, oh, this is the bent knee, we would make this tend to have the arm to create visual balance. But he didn't aspire to that idea. Okay, so we're looking at Delphi, that's where that charioteer was found. And I was gonna tell you lots about the Pythia. She is the one who basically receives Apollo's messages that people would ask for answers to. She did that basically in a little tiny room in the Temple of Delphi, or Delphi. And she's going to cause trouble soon. Class isn't over yet, so give me my couple minutes here. All right, so we got this sculpture. It's another example of classical sculpture. This is a really big figure, almost 7 feet tall. And we know he's a god. He was found in the water. That's why he's not melted down. So he was on his way to Rome as well. And he's either Zeus or Poseidon. These are the two gods, and he's got, look at his beard, that's telling us he's an older, mature man. So he's going to be one of the mature gods, male god, from Mount Olympus. And he's throwing something. Only 2 male gods that meet that description threw things. One of them is Zeus, who would throw lightning bolts.
Mm-hmm.
And the other one was Poseidon,
The
who would throw a
trident.
trident.
Yep.
The trident handles are usually small and thin. So I'm thinking it's Zeus. And notice, we're twisting the body. And he's looking, and he's measuring, and he's gonna throw. But he's calm. He may be throwing a spear at something, but he's just really calm about it. And that's that early classical style. Okay. And I want to wind up today looking at this guy. See the Roman copy? There are several Roman copies. The original's lost, melted down. But this is by the artist Myron. The original was by the artist Myron. It's called the discus thrower. And this is the moment when that classical, early classical style starts to become more dynamic. And he says, I want to do an athlete. And I want to get the motion and action of the athlete. It turns out when you throw a discus, you don't ever take this pose. But it crystallizes the idea of it and makes it beautiful. Well, look at the naturalism on the feet now.
Mm-hmm.
It's intensely naturalistic. And the other thing that the Greeks are doing is they're starting to really get into natural history, and they're really interested in why 2-headed snakes or 2-headed goats are born. And they're looking, physically looking doing close visual analysis of the world around them, which is one of the reasons why they're getting this. And on that note, I will see you guys on Tuesday.